I hadn't planned on staying longer than a week. But something in the quiet looks Peter gave me, in the strange tension that hummed through the house, made me linger. At first, I told myself it was nothing. Maybe it was simply my daughter's restless energy, or Peter's quiet way of observing everything around him, that made me curious. But there was an undeniable something. The slightest undercurrent, a pull that felt heavier with each day. Peter was attentive in ways Lydia had never been. He'd notice when I was lost in thought, eyes lingering just a second longer than was polite. We'd find ourselves sharing glances over coffee cups, or in the reflection of the kitchen window. Lydia, my dear daughter, always seemed to step away, caught up in her endless work, her life a whirlwind of obligations and deadlines. I'd catch myself wondering if she saw what was simmering beneath the surface, or maybe she trusted her husband and her mother too much to think twice. It was a warm autumn evening when she finally left us alone at the table, a last-minute call pulling her away. She was barely out of the room before Peter looked at me with a warmth I hadn't felt in years. And in that brief, silent exchange, the line between family and something unspoken blurred, ever so faintly. I told myself it would end there, that whatever pull existed between us was harmless. I told myself I was imagining things, but that one moment, that one look, changed everything, and in ways I never could have foreseen. The air was crisp as I stepped off the train, pulling my coat tighter around my shoulders. It had been nearly a year since I'd last seen Lydia and Peter in person, and a lifetime since I'd stayed at their place. Lydia, my only child, had always been fiercely independent, building a life with Peter that didn't seem to need much from me. And I respected that. But lately, she'd been calling more, sounding tired, frustrated even. "Just come stay with us for a while, Mom," she'd said, a hint of something in her voice I hadn't heard before. When Peter met me at the station, I noticed something had changed in him too. He looked older, as though the year had placed an invisible weight on his shoulders. I chalked it up to the stresses of his work as a civil engineer. Long hours, detailed plans, sites to inspect. His greeting was warm but reserved, the familiar politeness I'd come to expect from him. Still, there was a flicker of something else when he looked at me, a subtle intensity I couldn't quite place. "You look wonderful, Vivian," he said, taking my suitcase. "Flatterer," I replied, feeling a blush rise to my cheeks. The drive from the station was quiet, the conversation light. I could feel Peter glancing my way from time to time, as if he were about to say something but held back. When we arrived at the house, Lydia was on the phone, waving distractedly before retreating to her office. I knew her job as a business consultant kept her tied up, but I hadn't expected her to disappear the minute I arrived. Peter chuckled, catching my expression. "That's Lydia these days. Always on a call, always busy." I gave him a knowing smile. "She takes after her father that way. Once she's focused, she's lost to the world." Peter's eyes softened, and for a moment I felt like we shared a small understanding, an acknowledgement of the sometimes lonely lives we lived, tethered to those so often preoccupied. As he showed me to the guest room, I felt that slight undercurrent again, a tension I tried to brush off. The days settled into a routine that was comforting in its simplicity. Lydia and Peter would head out for work early, and I spent the mornings by myself, enjoying the garden, reading, and cooking meals. In the evenings, Lydia was often tired and would excuse herself early, leaving Peter and me to linger at the dinner table, sipping wine and talking. There was an ease to our conversations, a comfort I hadn't expected. Peter was insightful, funny even, a side of him I hadn't known before. He spoke thoughtfully about his work, about the beauty of the structures he helped create, about the satisfaction of solving intricate problems. I found myself drawn to his mind, the way he approached things with such care. And sometimes, as we talked, he'd look at me with a warmth that felt intimate. I'd catch myself leaning in, as if waiting for more. One evening, as the sun dipped low and cast long shadows across the kitchen. He lingered in the doorway, watching me as I chopped vegetables. There was a stillness in his gaze, a quiet intensity that made the air feel thicker. "Vivian," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Thank you for being here. I didn't realize how much I miss someone to talk to." I set down the knife, looking up at him. His words hung between us, heavy with something unsaid, something I couldn't quite name. "Peter, well, I'm happy to be here," I managed, feeling my cheeks warm. Just then, Lydia entered, her usual flurry of energy breaking the moment. I turned back to the cutting board, hoping she hadn't noticed the way Peter and I had been standing so close. As the week went on, the connection between us grew. We shared quiet mornings over coffee when Lydia was still asleep, exchanging glances over the rims of our mugs, letting silence fill in what we couldn't say. There was an unspoken understanding, a gentleness in Peter's eyes that both comforted and unsettled me. I hadn't felt this way in years, this quiet thrill at simply being seen. One morning, after Lydia had left for work, I found Peter alone in the garden, fixing a broken fence. He looked up as I approached, wiping his hands on his jeans, a sheepish smile on his face. "Didn't think you'd be up this early," he said, glancing at the sun, still low in the sky. "Couldn't sleep," I replied, folding my arms against the morning chill. We stood there in silence, watching the leaves tremble in the early breeze. The quiet stretched, a comfortable kind of quiet that felt as though we'd been sharing these moments for years. Then, without thinking, I reached out, brushing a speck of dirt from his shoulder. My hand lingered a beat too long, and when I looked up, his eyes met mine, steady, searching. "Vivian," he began, but the words caught in his throat. I quickly pulled my hand back, clearing my throat. "I should go make breakfast. Lydia will be up soon?" "Yes," he said, his voice strained. "That's probably best." That evening, I sat across from Lydia, who looked exhausted, her eyes barely lifting from her plate. She and Peter had exchanged only a handful of words, and the silence between them was becoming more and more pronounced. I wanted to ask if everything was all right, if she was happy, but I held my tongue, not wanting to pry. Later, when Lydia retreated to bed early, Peter and I found ourselves alone once again. This time, there was no avoiding the pull between us, no excusing it as mere coincidence. As we sat in the quiet, the faint sound of the clock ticking on the wall, I felt as though we were suspended in a moment outside of time, a moment that didn't belong in either of our lives. "I sometimes wonder," he began, looking down at his glass, "if this is all there is. If we're just meant to go through the motions, day in and day out, and pretend it's enough." I looked at him, my heart aching. "Peter, you're young. You still have so much ahead of you. Things can change." He shook his head, his gaze distant. "I don't know, Vivian. Sometimes I think I made all the wrong choices, that I missed something." His eyes met mine, filled with a vulnerability that made me feel both honored and terrified. I wanted to reach out to offer him some comfort, but I knew that anything I did now would only make things worse. So I sat there, keeping my hands folded in my lap, feeling the weight of his sadness settle over me. "I should go to bed," I finally whispered, feeling my throat tighten. "Yes, of course." His voice was barely audible, and as I stood up, I felt his eyes follow me, lingering in a way that left a strange warmth behind. The days blurred together, each one bringing us closer in small, subtle ways that seemed insignificant on their own, but added up to something undeniable. I found myself drawn to him, his quiet strength, his kindness, and yes, his loneliness. It mirrored something in me, something I'd buried long ago. Yet each time Lydia entered the room, the spell would break. I'd catch myself, forcing my feelings back into the shadows, reminding myself of the boundaries I was meant to respect. But the more I tried to push it away, the stronger the pull became, until I found myself wondering just how far I was willing to go. One evening, after Lydia had left the table to take another late call, Peter's hand brushed against mine as he reached for his glass. It was a small gesture, barely noticeable, but it sent a shiver through me that I couldn't ignore. Our eyes met across the table, and in that moment, I knew that whatever was happening between us was no longer just in my mind. The next few days passed in an uneasy rhythm, an unspoken dance that Peter and I seemed to have fallen into. We'd share a glance over coffee, our eyes meeting in a way that seemed to acknowledge something more, something fragile and delicate that we both sensed but dared not name. I kept telling myself it was harmless, a fleeting feeling that would pass, that the lines between us were still intact. But with each passing day, I found myself drawn deeper into the quiet moments we shared, the way he listened to me, the way he seemed to understand. One afternoon, as I was folding laundry, Peter appeared in the doorway, his sleeves rolled up, looking more relaxed than I'd seen him in a long time. "Need a hand?" he asked, stepping into the room. I shook my head, smiling. "I've been folding clothes for decades. I think I've got it down by now." He chuckled, leaning against the doorframe. "It's not about the clothes. Sometimes it's just nice to have company." There was something in his voice that made my hands falter, the fabric slipping through my fingers as I looked up at him. His expression was calm, but his eyes held that same quiet intensity that had been haunting me since I arrived. "Peter," I began, but the words trailed off, lost in the weight of the moment. He took a step closer, his gaze never leaving mine. "Vivian, I don't know if this is wrong or if I'm just lonely, but I know I look forward to every moment I get to spend with you. You make this place feel different." A part of me wanted to pull away, to laugh it off, and pretend he hadn't said anything at all. But the truth was, I felt it too. The house did feel different with him around, warmer somehow, less lonely. I could sense that he was holding something back, some deeper feeling that he was afraid to let slip. And I knew that if I acknowledged it, everything would change. I took a breath, choosing my words carefully. "Peter, I think we're both just lost in our own ways. Maybe it's easy to feel this way when you're missing something important." "Maybe," he murmured, his voice barely above a whisper. "But it doesn't make it any less real." Just then, Lydia's voice called out from downstairs, breaking the spell. Peter stepped back, running a hand through his hair as he composed himself. I forced a smile, folding the shirt in my hands with trembling fingers, willing my heart to slow down. When Lydia appeared in the doorway, she looked between us, her eyes narrowing slightly. "Did I interrupt something?" Peter shook his head quickly, flashing her a reassuring smile. "Just helping your mom with the laundry." Lydia's gaze lingered on us for a moment before she shrugged, oblivious to the tension that simmered just beneath the surface. "Well, dinner's almost ready. I thought you'd both like to know." As she turned to leave, I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding, exchanging a quick, almost apologetic glance with Peter. Whatever was happening between us, it was getting harder to hide, harder to deny. The next morning, Lydia left early for a business trip that would take her out of town for the night. She'd been preparing for it for weeks, her excitement barely contained as she packed her bags, chattering about the clients she'd be meeting and the presentations she'd be giving. She barely noticed me or Peter as she kissed us both goodbye, disappearing out the door without a second thought. For the first time since I arrived, Peter and I were truly alone. The house felt different, quieter, as though it were holding its breath along with me. I spent the day busying myself with small tasks, folding towels, dusting shelves, anything to keep my hands occupied and my mind clear. But by the time evening fell, the tension had become impossible to ignore. Peter suggested we have a simple dinner on the patio, a modest spread of bread, cheese, and a bottle of wine he'd been saving for a special occasion. The air was cool, the sky turning soft shades of lavender as the sun dipped below the horizon. There was a stillness to the moment, a sense that the world had narrowed to just the two of us, seated across from each other in the fading light. As we sipped our wine, our conversation grew deeper, touching on memories, regrets, and dreams we'd both put aside. I found myself talking about things I hadn't shared with anyone in years, confiding in him with a sense of ease I'd never expected. "Do you ever wonder," I asked, swirling my glass, "if there was something you were meant to do, someone you were meant to be, and somehow you missed it?" He nodded slowly, his gaze thoughtful. "All the time. I think about the choices I've made, the paths I could have taken, and I wonder if I'd be a different person, if I'd be happier." I looked at him, the sadness in his eyes mirroring my own. "I think we all have those thoughts, those quiet regrets that linger, but maybe it's never too late to find something more." He held my gaze, his hand reaching across the table, resting gently over mine. The warmth of his touch sent a shiver up my spine, the quiet comfort of his presence filling the hollow places inside me that I hadn't realized were empty. "Vivian?" he murmured, his voice soft and steady. "I don't know what this is, but I know that it feels real. More real than anything I've felt in a long time." My breath hitched, the weight of his words settling over me like a heavy blanket. I knew that what he was saying, what he was feeling, was something we couldn't act on, something that would shatter the lives we'd built if we let it. But in that moment, with the world falling away around us, it was hard to care about anything other than the man sitting across from me. As the night grew darker, we found ourselves sitting closer, the space between us shrinking with each passing second. I could feel his breath warm against my cheek, his hand lingering on mine, and I knew that if I leaned forward just a little, just an inch or two, everything would change. But before either of us could cross that invisible line, the sound of a car pulling into the driveway broke the spell. We both jerked back, our hands slipping apart as we quickly stood, our faces flushed with the intensity of the moment. "Vivian?" He began, but the words fell away as the front door opened and Lydia walked in, her expression tired but content. "Surprise," she called, laughing as she dropped her bags by the door. "The trip was canceled last minute. Can you believe it?" Peter and I exchanged a quick, guilty glance, our unspoken moments slipping away as we turned to greet her, our smiles forced and brittle. She didn't seem to notice, caught up in the excitement of her unexpected return, oblivious to the tension that had filled the house in her absence. As she began recounting her day, I excused myself, retreating to the sanctuary of the guest room where I could finally catch my breath. My heart was racing, my thoughts a jumble of emotions I couldn't begin to untangle. I knew that whatever had happened between Peter and me that night had crossed a line, had shifted something irrevocably between us, and yet I couldn't bring myself to regret it. That night, sleep eluded me. I lay awake, my mind replaying the evening over and over, the warmth of his hand, the intensity of his gaze, the quiet yearning that seemed to pass between us in every glance. I knew I should feel ashamed, that I should try to put distance between us for Lydia's sake, but the thought of losing that connection, of going back to a life without that feeling, was almost unbearable. The next morning, I rose early, hoping to avoid both Peter and Lydia as I tried to collect my thoughts. But as I stepped into the kitchen, I found him there, his back to me as he prepared coffee. He turned when he heard me enter, his expression soft, his eyes filled with an unspoken question. "Vivian," he began, his voice barely above a whisper, "I don't know what happened last night, but I can't stop thinking about it." I swallowed, my heart racing. "Neither can I." Before either of us could say anything more, Lydia's voice called out from upstairs, the sound of her footsteps approaching. Peter's gaze lingered on mine for a brief, aching moment before he turned away, pouring coffee into 2 mugs as if nothing had happened. As Lydia entered the kitchen, I forced a smile, trying to push the memory of the night before to the back of my mind. but I knew that whatever boundaries we'd tried to keep intact had been broken, and there was no going back. The morning after Lydia's return, the air felt thick, almost suffocating. I found myself hyper-aware of every glance, every word exchanged in that kitchen. Peter and I avoided each other's eyes, both of us acutely aware that Lydia was watching us with a casualness that felt just a little too deliberate. As the days passed, I noticed Lydia's gaze linger on Peter and me with a subtle suspicion, as though she were picking up on something out of place. I tried to tell myself I was just being paranoid, that she couldn't possibly suspect anything from our quiet glances and brief exchanges. But Lydia was observant, a trait she'd honed in her career. She could sense that something was wrong, even if she couldn't put her finger on it. One evening, as we sat down for dinner, Lydia glanced between Peter and me, her expression thoughtful. She tapped her fingers on the table absently, an old habit she'd had since childhood, a telltale sign that her mind was whirring. Finally, she looked at me, her tone casual but with an unmistakable edge. "Mom, have you been enjoying your stay?" I nodded, forcing a smile. "Of course. It's been nice, spending time with both of you." Peter kept his head down, focused on his food, but I could feel the tension radiating from him. "It's just, you seem different," she said, her gaze sharpening. "I can't quite put my finger on it." I felt my pulse quicken, but I forced myself to maintain composure. "Different? How so?" She shrugged, her eyes narrowing slightly. "I don't know, maybe it's nothing, just you seem quieter than usual, and Peter's been distracted." Peter cleared his throat, glancing at Lydia with a strained smile. "I've had a lot on my mind, work stuff, you know." Lydia's gaze lingered on him, her expression skeptical. "Right? Work?" The room fell into an uncomfortable silence, and I felt a cold sweat prickling at the back of my neck. Lydia's tone was light, but there was an unmistakable hint of doubt in her voice, a suggestion that she wasn't entirely convinced. A few days later, Lydia asked me to join her for lunch, a rare invitation given her busy schedule. She chose a small cafe downtown, a cozy, quiet place where we could talk without interruption. I could tell by the way she fidgeted with her coffee cup, the way her eyes darted around the room, that something was on her mind. "Mom," she began, her voice uncharacteristically hesitant, "I wanted to ask you something, and I want you to be honest with me." I nodded, my heart pounding as I braced myself for whatever was coming. "Do you think Peter's happy?" she asked, her eyes searching mine. The question caught me off guard, and I struggled to keep my expression neutral. "What do you mean?" she sighed, her gaze dropping to her coffee cup. "Lately, he's been distant. I feel like he's here, but not really here, like his mind is somewhere else. I don't know if it's just work or if it's something more." The vulnerability in her voice tugged at something deep within me, a pang of guilt that I couldn't ignore. I reached across the table, placing my hand over hers. "Lydia, sometimes people go through things that have nothing to do with the ones they love. Maybe he's just dealing with his own struggles, things he hasn't shared with you yet." She nodded, though her expression remained uncertain. I don't want to lose him, Mom. I don't know what I'd do if something happened to us." Her words struck me like a knife to the heart, and I felt a wave of shame wash over me. Here was my daughter, confiding in me, trusting me with her fears about her marriage, and I was holding on to secrets that could tear her world apart. I knew then that whatever was happening between Peter and me had to stop. I couldn't let myself be the reason her marriage crumbled. That evening, I tried to keep my distance from Peter, avoiding the quiet moments that had become so tempting, so dangerous. I busied myself with tasks around the house, focusing on anything that would keep my mind occupied and my feelings in check. But despite my efforts, I found myself drawn to him, my resolve weakening every time he looked my way. Later, as I was putting away dishes in the kitchen, Peter appeared in the doorway. He watched me for a moment, his expression unreadable, before stepping closer. "Vivian," he murmured, his voice barely above a whisper, "we need to talk." I shook my head, avoiding his gaze. "Peter, please. Lydia's already suspicious. We can't keep doing this." He reached for my hand, his touch warm and reassuring. "I know, but I can't pretend this isn't real. I can't just ignore what I feel." I closed my eyes, taking a deep breath. "Peter, we're crossing lines that can't be uncrossed. Lydia doesn't deserve this." "I know," he replied, his voice filled with a quiet desperation. "But I can't go back to the way things were. I feel alive with you, Vivian. I feel like I'm finally being seen." His words sent a shiver down my spine, but I forced myself to pull my hand away, the weight of guilt settling over me like a heavy blanket. "Peter, this has to end. We can't keep hurting Lydia like this." Before he could respond, the sound of footsteps echoed down the hallway, and Lydia appeared in the doorway, her eyes narrowing as she looked between us. "Am I interrupting something?" she asked, her voice laced with suspicion. Peter quickly stepped back, his expression carefully neutral. "No, we were just talking." Lydia's gaze lingered on us for a moment before she shrugged, her expression unreadable. "Well, I'm going to bed. Don't stay up too late." As she walked away, I felt a wave of relief mixed with a deep, gnawing sense of guilt. I knew that Lydia was watching us, that she was beginning to sense the tension that had built between Peter and me, and I knew that if we didn't put a stop to it soon, everything we'd tried to keep hidden would come crashing down. Over the next few days, Lydia's suspicions grew more apparent. She began watching us more closely, her gaze lingering on me whenever Peter and I were in the same room. Her questions became more pointed, her tone sharper, as though she were testing the boundaries, trying to uncover the truth that she sensed was hiding just beneath the surface. One evening, as we sat down for dinner, Lydia turned to me, her expression unreadable. "Mom," she began, her voice deceptively casual, "have you ever felt like there was something missing in your life?" The question caught me off guard, and I struggled to keep my expression neutral. "I suppose everyone feels that way sometimes." She nodded, her gaze unwavering. "I just wonder if you're happy, if you feel fulfilled." I forced a smile, the weight of her question pressing down on me. "I've had a good life, Lydia. I'm grateful for everything I have." She didn't respond, her eyes narrowing slightly as she studied me. It felt as though she were looking right through me, as though she could see every thought, every feeling I was trying so hard to hide. The conversation shifted after that, but the tension lingered, a heavy silence that hung over us like a storm cloud. I knew that Lydia's suspicions were growing stronger, that she was beginning to piece together the fragments of the truth. And I knew that if I didn't put a stop to things with Peter, the fragile balance we'd been clinging to would shatter beyond repair. That night, I lay awake, my mind racing with guilt and fear. I knew that my feelings for Peter were wrong, that they were tearing apart the life I'd built, the relationship I cherished with my daughter. And yet, the thought of letting him go, of returning to a life without the warmth and connection he brought, felt almost unbearable. In the early hours of the morning, I made a decision. I would leave. I would pack my bags and go back home, away from the temptation, away from the pain I was causing. It was the only way to salvage what was left of my relationship with Lydia, to preserve whatever fragile piece remained. But as I began to gather my things, a soft knock at my door stopped me in my tracks. I opened the door to find Peter standing there, his eyes filled with a sadness that mirrored my own. "Vivian," he whispered, his voice barely audible, "please, don't go." I shook my head, fighting back tears. "Peter, this is the only way. I can't keep hurting Lydia like this." He reached for my hand, his touch warm and familiar. "But what about us? What about what we feel?" I looked at him, my heart breaking. "Sometimes we have to let go of the things we want, the things we love, to protect the people we care about." He nodded, his expression filled with a quiet resignation. I understand. As I closed the door, I felt a sense of finality, a bittersweet relief that came with the decision I'd made. I knew that leaving was the only way to protect Lydia, to preserve whatever was left of our relationship. But as I lay down to sleep, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was leaving a part of myself behind, a piece of my heart that would never quite belong to me again. In the days that followed, a heavy silence settled over the house. I decided to stay a few more days, partly out of guilt and partly because Peter had asked me to, saying that Lydia had been under less stress since I'd arrived. Yet, every moment stretched with unbearable tension. Lydia's glances grew sharper, her questions more pointed, and each word felt like a test, a probe to uncover something neither Peter nor I was ready to confront. One evening, just after dinner, Lydia suddenly announced, "Mom, I'd like to have a word with you." Alone, Peter and I exchanged a quick, uneasy glance before I nodded, following Lydia into the sitting room. She closed the door behind her, her face carefully neutral. "Is everything all right, dear?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. Lydia sighed, sitting down on the edge of the couch, her gaze steady. "Mom, I'm not going to tiptoe around this anymore. I know something's been going on. I see the way you look at each other, the way Peter's changed. It's like there's something between you." The words hit me like a punch to the stomach. I opened my mouth to respond, but the words wouldn't come. She had seen through every feeble attempt we'd made to keep our feelings hidden. "Lydia," I began, my voice faltering. Nothing happened." "Nothing happened?" she repeated, her voice rising. "You're telling me nothing is going on between you and my husband?" Her accusation hung in the air. And though I wanted to deny it, the words felt hollow. I knew that Lydia, my perceptive daughter, would see through any lie I offered. The truth was plain in my eyes, in the way I hesitated, in the way my hands shook as I clasped them together. "Maybe I misread things," she said quietly, her gaze hard. "But I can't keep pretending that this isn't happening, that I don't feel like an outsider in my own marriage." My heart broke hearing those words, and I reached out, but she pulled away, a fierce determination in her eyes. "Please, Mom, I don't need explanations. I just need the truth." I took a breath, my voice barely a whisper. "Lydia, I'm so sorry. I didn't mean for this to happen. It's complicated." "Complicated?" She shook her head, her face twisting with disbelief. "You're my mother. He's my husband. It's not supposed to be complicated." The silence between us felt like an abyss, too wide and too deep to cross. I wanted to explain, to tell her about the loneliness, the connection that had blossomed unintentionally. But as I looked into her eyes, I knew that no explanation would ever be enough. "I need some time to think," she said, her voice trembling. "I need to figure out what all of this means for us." She stood, walking toward the door, her steps unsteady. Just before she left, she turned to me, her eyes filled with a mixture of anger and heartbreak. "Mom, I trusted you, and you betrayed me." The door closed behind her, leaving me alone in the silence of the room. The weight of her words crashed down on me, and I sank into the couch, my heart heavy with the knowledge that I had broken something that could never be repaired. Lydia left the house the next morning, a hasty trip she'd explained only briefly, saying she needed space. Peter and I were left alone, the echoes of our mistakes hanging between us like ghosts. I could barely look at him, the shame and regret clouding every interaction. We moved around the house like strangers, the warmth and connection that had once been so alluring, now feeling hollow and meaningless. Finally, one evening, Peter approached me in the quiet of the living room, his expression weary. "Vivian," he began, his voice heavy, "I'm sorry. I never wanted this to hurt Lydia. I never wanted any of this to hurt you." I looked at him, feeling the weight of everything that had happened pressing down on me. "It's too late for apologies, Peter. We both knew what we were risking." He nodded, his gaze dropping. "I don't know what to do now. I feel like I've lost everything." I sighed, my voice filled with a sadness that felt bottomless. Sometimes we make choices we can't take back, Peter. Choices that change everything. The silence stretched between us, thick with regret. I knew that whatever connection we'd shared had been real, that it had filled a void we'd both been carrying. But that didn't make it right, didn't change the pain we'd caused. Maybe it's best if I leave, I said finally, the decision solidifying in my mind. I don't think I can stay here any longer. Peter didn't argue. He simply nodded, his gaze distant, as though he too had accepted the inevitable. I returned home, my heart heavy with the memories of the life I had shattered. Lydia and I barely spoke in the weeks that followed, her silence a painful reminder of the bond I had broken. I tried reaching out to her, leaving messages and sending letters, but her responses were few and curt, her words carrying the weight of betrayal. Time passed slowly, each day blending into the next. I threw myself into work, trying to fill the emptiness with projects and routines, but the ache of loss lingered, a constant reminder of what I had lost. One evening, months after my return, I received a letter from Lydia. Her words were brief, filled with the guarded tone I had come to expect, but there was a hint of something softer, a glimmer of the daughter I had once known. "Mom," she wrote, "I don't know if I'll ever understand what happened between you and Peter, or if I'll ever be able to forgive you fully. But I'm trying. I want to believe that our relationship meant more than one mistake, that it can survive even this. I just need time. Please be patient with me." Her words filled me with a mixture of hope and sorrow. I knew that the road to forgiveness would be long and difficult, that the wounds I had caused would take years to heal. But I was willing to wait, to earn back the trust I had shattered. In the years that followed, Lydia and I rebuilt our relationship slowly, piece by fragile piece. We never spoke of what had happened, the betrayal left unmentioned. But there was an understanding between us, a silent acknowledgement of the pain and the healing that had taken place. Peter and Lydia divorced not long after my departure, their marriage unable to survive the strain that our actions had caused. I heard through mutual friends that Peter moved to a small town on the coast, seeking a fresh start, a life untouched by the mistakes of the past. As for me, I found a new sense of purpose in my work, dedicating myself to the art gallery with a passion I hadn't felt in years. I poured my emotions into my work, finding solace in the creative expression that had once been my refuge. Through the years, I learned to forgive myself, to accept the choices I had made and the consequences they had wrought. And though the memories lingered, a quiet ache that would always be part of me, I found peace in the knowledge that I had learned, that I had grown. I had made mistakes, had hurt those I loved, but I had also found the strength to face the truth, to make amends, and to rebuild. The bond between Lydia and me would never be the same, but it was something real, something forged through pain and understanding. And in the end, that was enough. I thought I was saving my marriage when I suggested opening it up. The spark was gone, the routine was killing us, and I was desperate for something, anything, to bring us back to life. But I never imagined that my husband would take my idea and use it to find someone else. If you'd told me 10 years ago that I'd be the one to suggest an open marriage, I would have laughed in your face. I was the faithful wife, the planner, the one who made sure every anniversary was celebrated with the right level of romance. My husband Tom and I were a team. We had a beautiful house in the suburbs, 2 grown kids off at college, and a life that looked perfect on paper. But what people didn't see was how stale everything had become. At 48, I felt invisible. Not just to the world, but to my own husband. The man who used to leave me love notes in the kitchen now barely looked up from his phone during dinner. The passion we once had fizzled out years ago, replaced by predictable routines and a bedroom life that felt more like a chore than an escape. It started as a passing thought, an idea I picked up from a podcast I'd listened to while working on a client project late at night. Opening your marriage doesn't have to mean losing it, the host had said. It can be a way to rediscover each other by rediscovering yourselves. The thought lingered, growing louder every time I caught Tom zoning out during another one of my attempts to reconnect. I told myself it wasn't about jealousy or rejection. It was about liberation. If we could break out of the monotony, if we could explore new experiences, maybe we'd find a way back to each other. I brought it up on a Friday night over a bottle of wine, just the two of us at the kitchen table. I could tell Tom wasn't in the mood for heavy conversations, but I dove in anyway. Tom, I started, swirling the last bit of wine in my glass. Have you ever thought about what it would be like to, I don't know, be with someone else? His head snapped up, his eyes narrowing. What kind of question is that? I hesitated, suddenly regretting my choice of words. I mean, don't you ever feel like we've gotten stuck? Like we're just going through the motions? Tom sighed, leaning back in his chair. Sarah, if this is about the way things have been lately. It is, I interrupted, and I think it's about time we try something new. His brow furrowed, and I could see the wheels turning in his head. Something new like what? I took a deep breath, my palms sweating against the stem of the glass. Like opening things up, just for a while, to see if it helps us find excitement again. The silence that followed was suffocating. Tom stared at me as if I'd just suggested setting the house on fire. You're kidding, he said finally. I'm not, I said, forcing myself to meet his gaze. I've been reading about it, and it's not as crazy as it sounds. It's not about replacing each other. It's about sleeping with other people, he cut in, his tone sharp. I winced but didn't back down. Exploring, trying to find what we're missing, together. Tom didn't say anything for what felt like an eternity. Then, with a deep sigh, he got up and poured himself another glass of wine. You think this is going to fix us? I think it's worth a try, I said softly. He took a long sip, staring out the kitchen window. I'll think about it. I didn't expect him to agree, not really. Tom was the steady, reliable type, the kind of man who didn't rock the boat, who preferred routine over risk. But a week later, after another silent dinner and another night of staring at separate screens in separate corners of the house, he surprised me. Okay, he said out of nowhere, setting his fork down. Okay, what? He leaned back in his chair, his expression unreadable. We can try it, the open marriage thing, but we set some rules. Relief washed over me, but it was tinged with nervous excitement. Rules are good, I said quickly. What kind of rules? No emotional attachments, he said firmly. No talking about it in front of the kids. And total honesty. If we meet someone, we tell each other. No secrets. I nodded, my heart pounding. Agreed. At first, it felt thrilling, like stepping onto a roller coaster I wasn't sure I was ready for. I downloaded an app, created a profile, and found myself exchanging messages with men who saw me as something I hadn't been in years, desirable. My first date was with a man named Greg, a divorced art teacher with kind eyes and a quick wit. We met for drinks at a quiet bar downtown, and though I was nervous, it felt good to be seen again, to have someone hang on my every word. We ended the night in his car, parked under the soft glow of a streetlight, his hands tentative but eager as they traced my curves. It was exciting, but also surreal, a reminder that I was stepping into uncharted territory. Tom, meanwhile, was slower to jump in. He wasn't the type to flirt with strangers or put himself out there, and I thought that would work in my favor. I thought I'd have time to ease into this, to test the waters without worrying about him finding someone before I did. But I was wrong. It started with small changes. Tom began coming home later, saying he was meeting up with colleagues after work. He started paying more attention to his appearance, wearing cologne I hadn't seen him touch in years, replacing his usual worn-out loafers with sleek new shoes. At first, I didn't think much of it. If anything, I was glad to see him shaking off his routine. But then came the nights when he'd come home smiling, his phone buzzing with messages he didn't bother to hide. You're seeing someone, I said one night, unable to keep the edge out of my voice. Tom didn't look up from his plate. Her name's Rachel, he said simply. Rachel. Just a name, but it hit me like a punch to the gut. What's she like? I asked, trying to sound casual. Fun, he said with a shrug. Different. The word different hung in the air, heavier than it should have been. Different from what? From me? I told myself it was fine, that this was what we'd agreed to. But the truth was, I hadn't expected him to actually connect with someone. Not like this. The more time he spent with Rachel, the more distant he became. Our once empty house now felt hollow, as if every corner was filled with the ghost of someone else's laughter. And every time I asked if he wanted to close the marriage, if we could go back to the way things were, he'd shake his head and say, "Let's give it a little more time." But time wasn't on my side. The night everything fell apart, Tom came home late, his face flushed and his tie askew. He didn't bother with excuses this time. Instead, he sat down across from me, his hands clasped together like he was about to deliver a verdict. "I need to tell you something," he said, his voice soft but firm. I braced myself, my stomach churning. "What is it?" He took a deep breath. "I think I'm in love with her." The words landed like a bomb, shattering the fragile illusion I'd been holding on to. "What?" I whispered, my voice barely audible. "I didn't plan for this to happen," he said quickly, "but I can't deny it anymore. Rachel, she makes me feel alive in a way I haven't felt in years." "And I don't," I shot back, my voice trembling with anger and disbelief. Tom looked away, unable to meet my gaze. "It's not about you, Sarah, it's about me." I laughed bitterly, tears streaming down my face. "This was my idea," I said, my voice breaking. "I thought it would save us." "So did I," he admitted. "But now, I don't know if I can come back from this." That night, I lay in bed, staring at the empty space beside me, wondering how everything had gone so horribly wrong. I'd opened a door I couldn't close, and now I was standing on the other side, alone. When Tom first mentioned Rachel's name, I tried to convince myself it was nothing. After all, this was my idea. I had suggested the open marriage. I'd wanted us to explore, to rediscover ourselves. I never considered that Tom might rediscover himself with someone else. At first, his behavior seemed harmless, texting here and there, smiling at his phone more often than usual. But soon, Rachel became a fixture in his life, whether I liked it or not. Every time he came home late, I knew where he'd been. He didn't even try to hide it. It was as if he thought his honesty absolved him of the guilt I desperately wanted him to feel. It didn't take long for me to notice the changes in him. He'd started wearing cologne again, the same one he used to wear when we were dating. He updated his wardrobe, swapping out the boring khakis and polos for tailored slacks and crisp button-downs. Even his demeanor shifted. He was lighter, more confident. For the first time in years, Tom was glowing, and it wasn't because of me. One night, as he walked through the door, still carrying the scent of the fancy restaurant I knew he couldn't have gone to alone, I decided to confront him. "How was your night?" I asked, trying to keep my tone casual. He hesitated, just for a second, before responding. "It was good. Just grabbed some drinks after work." "With Rachel?" I pressed, my voice sharper than I intended. His lips tightened. "Yes, with Rachel. Is that a problem?" I opened my mouth to respond, but the words caught in my throat. How could I say it was a problem when I'd been the one to push for this? I forced a smile instead, swallowing my pride. "No. Just curious." Determined not to let Tom's newfound energy leave me behind, I threw myself into the arrangement we'd agreed on. I went back to the apps, meeting new people, convincing myself that I could match his excitement if I tried hard enough. There was Ethan, a charming photographer with a penchant for flattery, and Jason, a divorced professor who appreciated my sense of humor. My encounters with them were exhilarating in their own way. Ethan whisked me off to a private gallery showing, his hand resting on the small of my back as he whispered compliments that made me blush. Jason was slower, more deliberate, his touch gentle, as we shared a bottle of wine in his dimly lit apartment. Each man brought something different to the table, and for a while it worked. I felt desirable again, alive in a way I hadn't in years. But no matter how thrilling the moments were, they always ended the same way. With me lying awake at night, staring at the empty side of the bed and wondering where Tom was. The turning point came one Saturday afternoon. Tom had promised to spend the day with me, a rare occurrence lately, but at the last minute, he canceled. "Something came up," he said vaguely, his eyes avoiding mine. "Something, or someone." I shot back, unable to keep the bitterness out of my voice. He sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. Rachel and I have plans. I'll make it up to you, I promise. The casual way he said it, as if Rachel's time was more important than mine, made my blood boil. She's really that important to you, isn't she? Tom's jaw tightened. This is what you wanted, Sarah. You wanted us to have the freedom to explore. I'm just doing what we agreed. But this isn't what we agreed, I snapped. We agreed to keep it casual, to keep it physical. You're treating her like she's your girlfriend. For the first time, Tom looked uncomfortable. Maybe she is, he said quietly. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. My vision blurred with tears, but I refused to let him see me cry. You're breaking the rules, I said, my voice shaking. You promised no emotional involvement. And you promised this would bring us closer, he countered, his voice calm but cutting. But all it's done is show me how much I've been missing. I couldn't get Rachel out of my head. I tried to distract myself with work, with dates, with anything that would take my mind off the image of her and Tom together, but it was no use. She was everywhere, in his smile, in the way he carried himself, in the empty space he left behind every time he chose her over me. One night, unable to resist the pull of my own jealousy, I searched for her online. It didn't take long to find her social media profiles. Rachel was everything I wasn't. Young, vibrant, carefree. Her pictures were filled with yoga poses on tropical beaches, late-night dinners with friends, and selfies that radiated confidence. She wasn't just a fling. She was a threat. I started obsessing over her, scrolling through her photos late into the night, comparing myself to her in every way. Was this what Tom wanted? Someone younger, more exciting, less complicated? Tom and I were drifting further apart, and neither of us seemed willing to stop it. Our conversations became strained, reduced to logistics about bills and grocery lists. The intimacy we once shared, the quiet moments of laughter, the unspoken understanding, was gone, replaced by a chasm I didn't know how to cross. One evening I tried to bridge the gap. "Do you still love me?" I asked as we sat across from each other at the dinner table, the silence between us deafening. Tom looked up, startled by the question. "Of course I do," he said, but the hesitation in his voice betrayed him. "Then why does it feel like you're already gone?" I pressed, tears brimming in my eyes. He didn't answer. Desperate to reclaim some part of him, I threw myself into a whirlwind of passion with my newest lover, Derek, a younger coworker who made no secret of his attraction to me. Our encounters were intense and fleeting, a heady mix of lust and desperation that left me breathless but hollow. We met in secret, his apartment, my car, even the empty conference room at the office after hours. Each time I told myself it was what I needed, that it would make the ache in my chest go away. But it didn't. If anything, it made it worse, because no matter how many times Derek whispered my name, it wasn't Tom's voice I heard. The final straw came one night, when Tom came home late again, his tie loose around his neck, a faraway look in his eyes. I couldn't hold it in anymore. "Is this it?" I demanded, standing in the middle of the living room, my arms crossed tightly over my chest. "Are you just going to walk away from us?" He stopped in his tracks, his expression unreadable. "I'm not walking away," he said evenly, "but I can't pretend everything's fine anymore." "Then stop pretending," I shot back. "Say what you mean." Tom hesitated, his jaw clenching. "I think I'm falling in love with her." The room spun around me, his words slicing through me like a blade. "What about me?" I whispered, my voice trembling. "What about us?" "I don't know," he admitted, his voice soft. "I don't know if there's an us anymore." That night, I lay awake in the dark, the weight of his words pressing down on me. I had wanted freedom, excitement, something to shake us out of our rut. But I never imagined it would lead to this. I never imagined it would lead to me losing him. Tom's confession was the moment my world began to crumble. "I think I'm falling in love with her." The words repeated in my head like a cruel echo, growing louder every time I tried to silence it. He wasn't just exploring anymore. Rachel wasn't just a fling. She had become something more, something deeper, something I wasn't. I sat on the edge of the bed that night, staring at the empty space where Tom usually slept. I wanted to scream, to cry, to beg him to take it back. But when he finally came to bed, he didn't even look at me. He just lay down, turned away, and fell asleep, as if nothing had changed. The next morning, I confronted him again. I couldn't let it sit in the air, unresolved. Tom, I said, standing in the kitchen as he poured himself a cup of coffee. We need to talk. He sighed, setting the mug down. Sarah, I don't want to fight. This isn't a fight, I said, my voice shaking. This is our marriage. He turned to face me, his eyes tired. I know, and I'm trying to figure out what that means. What it means, I snapped, is that you don't get to fall in love with someone else while I'm still here, still trying to make this work. I didn't plan this, he said quietly. You think I wanted to feel this way? That I wanted to hurt you? Then why do it? I demanded, tears streaming down my face. Why not stop it before it got this far? Tom ran a hand through his hair, his expression torn. Because I don't know how to stop feeling what I feel. His words were a knife to my chest. I turned away, unable to look at him anymore. You need to decide, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Her or me? For days, Tom avoided giving me an answer. He stayed out later and later, claiming he needed time to think, but I knew where he was. I knew who he was with. One night, I couldn't take it anymore. When he walked through the door, the smell of Rachel's perfume still clinging to him, I snapped. Do you even care about me anymore? I shouted, standing in the living room as he set his keys down. Sarah, not tonight, he said, his voice weary. No, we're doing this now, I insisted. Do you even want to save this marriage, or are you just waiting for me to give up so you don't have to feel guilty? His jaw tightened, his eyes narrowing. You think this is easy for me? You think I don't feel guilty every damn day? Then stop, I cried. Stop seeing her, stop pretending like this is normal, and start fighting for us. Tom shook his head, his expression pained. It's not that simple. It is, I screamed, my voice breaking. It's as simple as choosing me, choosing the life we built, choosing the family we created. But you won't, will you? Because you don't want me anymore. He didn't deny it. And that hurt more than anything else. In the days that followed, I tried everything I could to bring him back. I cooked his favorite meals, planned date nights, even tried to reignite the physical spark between us. But no matter what I did, he stayed distant. One night, I tried to seduce him, slipping into the silk lingerie I hadn't worn in years and waiting for him in our bedroom. When he walked in and saw me, his eyes flickered with something, guilt, regret, maybe even longing, but he didn't move closer. Sarah, he said softly, you don't have to do this. But I want to, I whispered, stepping closer. I want us. He hesitated, his hands brushing my arms, but then he pulled away. I can't, he said, his voice breaking. I'm sorry. He walked out of the room, leaving me standing there, humiliated and heartbroken. I couldn't take it anymore. If Tom wouldn't end things with Rachel, I would. I found her address through a mutual friend of Tom's and showed up at her yoga studio unannounced. She was leading a class when I arrived, her voice calm and soothing as she guided a group of women through Downward Dog. I waited until the class ended, my heart pounding as she walked over to greet me. Sarah, right? She said, her smile polite but guarded. You know who I am, I said coldly. Her smile faltered. I do. And I know why you're here. Then you know what I'm about to say, I snapped. Stay away from my husband. Rachel crossed her arms, her expression unreadable. I didn't ask for this, Sarah. He came to me. Because you let him, I spat. You knew he was married and you didn't care. I care about him, she said, her voice steady, and he cares about me. Her calmness only fueled my anger. You're a homewrecker, I hissed. You're ruining my life. Rachel tilted her head, her gaze unwavering. Maybe your marriage was already broken and you just don't want to admit it. Her words stung because deep down I knew she was right. I turned and walked away, tears blurring my vision as I realized I wasn't just fighting Rachel. I was fighting the truth. A week later, Tom sat me down at the kitchen table, his expression heavy with the weight of the decision he'd made. I'm moving out, he said simply. My heart dropped. What? I need space, he continued, his voice strained, to figure out what I want, who I want to be. And I can't do that here. I stared at him, my mind racing. So that's it? After 20 years, you're just leaving? I'm not leaving you, he said. I'm leaving this version of us. Because it's not working, Sarah. You know that as well as I do. His words hung in the air, suffocating me. I wanted to scream, to beg him to stay, but I knew it wouldn't make a difference. He'd already made up his mind. That night, as I lay in bed alone, I felt a crushing sense of emptiness. I had suggested the open marriage to save us, but all it had done was expose the cracks we'd been ignoring for years. And now, I was left to pick up the pieces of a life I no longer recognized. The house felt cavernous after Tom moved out. Every creak of the floorboards and echo of my footsteps reminded me of how empty it had become. His absence wasn't just physical, it was the loss of a life we had built together. The silence was a constant reminder of my failure to hold it together. Friends and family started to notice the cracks. Some reached out, offering awkward condolences. Others avoided me altogether, the whispers behind my back louder than any conversation. My sister, ever the blunt one, summed it up best. "You brought this on yourself, Sarah. What did you expect?" I didn't have an answer. I wasn't even sure anymore why I'd suggested the open marriage in the first place. Was it boredom? A desperate bid for freedom? Or had I been looking for a way out, and this was just my way of lighting the match? After weeks of barely functioning, I took a friend's advice and started therapy. It felt like admitting defeat at first, but I quickly realized how much I needed it. My therapist, a no-nonsense woman named Karen, didn't let me off the hook. "Why did you want an open marriage?" she asked during one of our first sessions. "I thought it would fix us," I said. "And did it?" I hesitated, then shook my head. "No, it just made everything worse." Karen nodded. "Maybe it didn't fix you because the problems were never about excitement or exploration. Maybe they were about communication, trust, and connection. And opening the marriage only highlighted how broken those things were." Her words hit me like a slap, but she was right. Tom and I had been drifting for years, and instead of addressing it, I had thrown a grenade into our lives and hoped for the best. Therapy gave me the clarity I needed to start rebuilding. I focused on my freelance graphic design work, taking on new clients and bigger projects that pushed me creatively. For the first time in years, I felt like I was thriving professionally, even as my personal life remained a mess. I also began reconnecting with old friends, the ones I'd neglected during the years I spent trying to keep up appearances. Slowly, they became my support system, reminding me that I wasn't alone, even when it felt like I was. One of them, Lisa, dragged me to a yoga class one Saturday morning. I almost didn't go, afraid of running into Rachel, but Lisa assured me it was a different studio. It turned out to be one of the best decisions I'd made in months. The class was calming, and for the first time in a long time, I felt connected to my body again. About 6 months after he left, Tom called me. It was late and I almost didn't answer, but something made me pick up. "Sarah," he said, his voice hesitant. I wanted to check in, see how you're doing." "I'm fine," I said cautiously. "Why?" There was a long pause before he spoke again. "Rachel and we're not together anymore." I felt a strange mix of emotions, relief, vindication, and to my surprise, sadness. "I'm sorry to hear that," I said, though I wasn't sure if I meant it. "It wasn't what I thought it would be," he admitted. "She's a great person, but it wasn't real, not the way I thought it was." I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to lash out, to throw his choices back in his face, but another part of me, the part that still cared for him despite everything, just felt tired. "Tom," I said finally, "what do you want from me?" "I don't know," he said. "Maybe just to apologize for everything." Despite Tom's apology, I knew there was no going back. Our marriage had been over long before Rachel, and I wasn't interested in trying to revive something that had already died. Instead, I focused on building something new. Through work, I met Jack, a 55-year-old widowed architect who had a quiet strength about him. He wasn't flashy or overly romantic, but he was kind and attentive in a way that felt safe. Our relationship grew slowly, built on mutual respect and understanding, rather than the adrenaline-fueled passion that had defined my earlier attempts to distract myself. Jack didn't try to fix me, and I didn't expect him to. Instead, he gave me the space to be myself, flaws and all. And for the first time in years, I felt like I was enough. One day, out of the blue, Tom showed up at my door. He looked nervous, like he wasn't sure if he should be there. "Can we talk?" he asked. I hesitated but nodded, stepping aside to let him in. We sat in the living room, the awkwardness between us palpable. "I miss you," he said finally. "I miss us." I blinked, taken aback. "Tom, I know I screwed up," he continued. "I know I hurt you. But I still care about you, Sarah. I always have." For a moment I felt the pull of old habits, the temptation to fall back into what was familiar. But then I thought about everything I'd been through, the pain, the heartbreak, the hard-won growth, and I knew I couldn't go back. Tom, I said gently, I care about you too. But we've both changed, and I don't think we can go back to who we were. He looked at me, his expression a mix of disappointment and understanding. I figured you'd say that, he said with a small, sad smile, but I had to try. After Tom left, I sat on the balcony of my apartment, watching the sunset with a glass of wine in hand. Jack joined me a few minutes later, placing a hand on my shoulder as he sat beside me. Everything okay? He asked. Yeah, I said, leaning into him. It's just funny how life turns out sometimes. He smiled, squeezing my hand. Funny isn't always bad. I looked out at the horizon, the sky painted in hues of orange and pink, and realized he was right. My life wasn't what I'd planned, but it was mine. And for the first time in a long time, I felt at peace. Sometimes the things we think will save us are the very things that break us. But from the wreckage we find ourselves. And in that, we find a new kind of freedom.